for Naoya?
っていうのはどういうことですか？
How does it work for Naoya's mandatory?
Naoya's current mandatory, I believe it's the IBF, was first in line. Their number one rated contender and mandatory is Sam Goodman. What we in the IBF, because we're next in line, what we discussed about was that if we had the same number one rated contender in our ratings, we would do a unified mandatory challenger in order to avoid forcing Naoya Inoue to do mandatory, to unify the mandatories, and we would allow the champion to have a broader spectrum of making the fights that he wants and what the fans want to see, and not force him to do mandatory, which is one of the problems that we have. We've discussed with the other sanctioning bodies of trying to have a unified system for the mandatories, because fighters like Inoue, Canelo, Crawford, Usyk, the big players, times have changed, and we need to adapt to those times, and maybe through our rules make some variations that will allow those champions to fight whoever they want or whoever the general public wants to see them. Because the question is, not the question, I would say, the problem is on designating a mandatory challenger that nobody knows. And you would force a champion like Inoue to fight somebody that doesn't have a TV following, doesn't have a brand recognition or a big profile before the general public. And that is a problem with the selection process, not the system. So from the WBO, once Inoue discharges his IBF because Sam Goodman was dropped from number 1 to number 2 because he's been inactive. Number 1 now is Carl James Martin, number 1, Sam Goodman number 2. So when our mandatory comes, we would have to see how do we select the mandatory. Either we do a elimination bout to 1 and 2 to provide both fighters an opportunity to raise their profile, to justify the mandatory, or the highest available rated contender at the time when our mandatory comes, regardless if it's Carl James Martin or another fighter, when that time comes, we will determine accordingly. But we will certainly consider what will be the best scenario, not only for Inoue, but for the promoter, the fighters, the fan, the general public. Because you have to have sensibility in the decision-making process.
もちろんこれから統一王者っていうものをどんどん誕生させていきたいということも思っています。で、そういったところで自分たちのこのボクシングというスポーツをプロモートもちろんできていきますよね。なのでこれからでも多分今こちら WBO なんですけれども、井上尚弥選手に関してはまずはそのローテーションで IBF が優先順位を持ってるはずなんです。なのでそこの1位サム・フルトマンで次に WBO の1位っていうことになってくるんですけども、やはり指名試合でこの時間を潰してしまうっていうのはとてもこちらでも由々しき事態だと思っているので、その各団体の指名1位の選手同士が戦ってそこでチャンピオンに挑むっていうやり方もこれからは考えていくのかなと思います。また他団体の方でもとも今話をさせてもらっているので、そういったチャンピオンにとってそしてプロモーターもそして一般のファンにとっても喜ばしい結果が出るような話を今しています。で WBO はなので1位サム・グッドマンがインアクティブの時期もあり、カール・ジェイス・マーティンっていう名前も出てきているんですよね。なので1位と2位に対戦してもらってそこで最終的にタイトルマッチを行うのか、それともその時々で最新のランキングを見て1位なのかっていうところもあるんですけども、残念ながら必ずしも1位の選手が世界的に名前変わるとは限らない。そういったところも問題になってくると思うんですね。なので自分たちにとってそしてプロモーターやボクサーにとってもベストシナリオになるような結論を解決策として出していければいいなと WBO としては思っています。Okay, thank you so much for your time.
ありがとうございます。